Howdy readers, I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse, and this is the first of what will be three Q&A videos, kind of in honor of my having reached 500 subscribers, which was about 5 weeks ago now, I think, 5 or 6 weeks ago. So the first question is from Shawn Fowler, and Shawn asked, do you have a favorite concept album? Now, I define concept album in a pretty limited way. From what I gather, there are lots of kind of experimental ways to define it. But I look at a concept album as an album that tells a story, a narrative story lyrically from beginning to end. And I have two. So the first is The Ballad of Sally Rose by Emmylou Harris. And I hadn't thought about this album in a long time. But Caleb recently made a comment on a Johnny Keane video, something to do with a hymn that Johnny Keane mentioned. And the lyric from the hymn made me think of a song. I was like, God, what song was that? I could not remember. And then I remembered it was Sweet Chariot. And this is just a beautiful classic country album. And then my other favorite, and probably my all-time favorite concept album, is Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche. This came out when I was in junior high school, and if you listen to this now, the lyrics, it feels like it could have been written now. I mean, it still, sadly enough, feels relevant today. It feels necessary, it feels important, it feels like it really contains and kind of distills the rage that many of us feel today. And it's terrific. Just one of the great rock albums of all time. So question 2 is from Abby Morrow. And Abby asked, how would you like to be remembered? It's a complicated question. So I would like to be remembered as someone who was really pretty good at making other people laugh. I make my wife laugh a lot, which is nice. But I also make my coworkers laugh quite a bit, and my friends laugh, and my clients laugh. I'm probably not as funny here on BookTube as I could be, but that's fine. You guys may actually have a Batman video in store for you at some point, and that'll change that. But so that's one way I'd like to be remembered. But I'd also really like to be remembered as somebody who loved hugely, somebody who was loyal, who had great integrity, who was willing to hold himself and his own kind of side of the fence, politically and otherwise, as accountable as I'm keen to hold the other side of the fence, because that's just not something that's done very much in this world. We all have this kind of double standard, it seems like, and I hate that. It drives me crazy. It doesn't make any sense to me, actually. Let's see. Wilsonn Shugart asks, how have your tastes and how has the experience of reading changed throughout your life? So, even though I read quite a bit when I was a little kid in grade school, I don't really remember reading much in grade school. Like, I don't have very many specific memories of actually reading when I was in grade school. In my early teens, I really got into fantasy novels. Like, I was really into the Dragonlance Chronicles and C.J. Cherry books. And then in my mid-teen years, I went completely away from reading. I just got obsessed with music and hanging out with friends, and I didn't really read at all for a couple of years. And then when I came back, that's when I discovered literary fiction. There in school, we read Steinbeck, we read Hemingway. I would browse through the library and just find books on my own. I read Jane Smiley's 1,000 Acres for the first time in my teens, just because I thought it looked good, and lo and behold, it was. And so since then, it's really just been literary fiction. In college, I kind of went away a little bit from reading as well. I got really, really obsessed with film. And, but then, obviously came back to reading and went to graduate school for literature. And BookTube has really done wonders for my reading as well, actually. Yeah, I'm watching a lot fewer movies here lately, which on the one hand kind of sucks because I love films, but it's nice to be reading as much as I have been. Emar Reads asked, if you could only reread one book for the rest of your life, what would it be? So this was tricky too. The easy answer would be the Bible, but as you guys know, I tend to think of the Bible more as a library of books, and so I didn't want to kind of cop out there. And then the next easy answer would be the book that is number one on my version of the top tens tag, which is Bleak House by Dickens. But I really just kind of wandered our shelves and looked for something that jumped out at me. Like, in this moment right now, if I could only reread one book for the rest of my life, what would it be? And what I chose was, or I should say what chose me, was Independent People by Haldor Laxness. And this was on my top 10s tag as well. But it's just beautiful. It's a strange novel. It has a lot of grandeur in it. It has a lot of beauty in it. It's got humor, and it's so wise about people and their mistakes, their regrets, what they do right and what they dramatically do wrong. I just find it epic in the best way and in the most accessible way. And I wouldn't mind at all rereading this for the rest of my life at the expense of everything else. Let's see. Jasmine at Jasmine's Reads asked, what did your life / aspirations / major beliefs look like at age 22? So I'm 43 now. When I was 22, I had just decided that I wanted to be an English teacher. I'm not an English teacher. I worked very hard at becoming an English teacher for many years, and I did it for a number of years as well. I was a part-time English teacher, but it just didn't turn out that way. I write radio commercials and I sell radio advertising, and I have for 5 years now, and I'm really good at it, and it's a lot of fun, and I make a good living. Aspirations, part of me wanted to, grow up, get married. I might have even still wanted kids at that age. Thankfully, that didn't last that long. We don't have kids. I don't want kids. Kelly doesn't want kids. We have our cat, and that's really kind of all we can handle. Part of me thought at the age of 22, I was pretty reckless with my life. And what I did in those days, and not in the sense of like doing drugs or anything like that. Like, I've never actually done drugs, believe it or not. But yeah, I was pretty reckless with how I lived and the decisions I made. It's all right, buddy. And part of me didn't think that I would kind of be around right in my 30s or my 40s, and thankfully I was proven wrong. My 30s were better than my 20s. My 40s thus far have been better than my 30s. And, life has been really good. Not at all what I thought it would be. Very, very different in many ways. At that age, I was an agnostic. Right now I'm a Christian, and I've been a Christian for more than 10 years. A dozen years, 12, 13 years. The biggest mistake somebody at the age of 22 can make is thinking that they know how things are going to turn out for them in their 30s and in their 40s. I don't know how it's going to be different, but it's going to be radically different than you think it's going to be. Dillard Lester asks, what is the tattoo on your right forearm, and what does it mean? So this tattoo was designed by a student that I had the first summer that I taught. It was a writing program in northern Wyoming where I worked with teenagers. I was one of a number of teachers who worked with teenagers. I taught screenwriting and poetry. And this student, she was kind of doing or designing these kind of faux tattoos for the other campers that year. And she designed this one for me, and I got it tattooed to kind of mark what I thought was going to be the beginning of my career. It's a fairy, and Yeah, and the little plank down at the bottom of it represents this wooden bridge that ran over a creek at that camp. And the little lines below that little plank there represent my legs dangling in the water and her legs dangling in the water. As we had a long conversation one afternoon. Probably sat there with our feet in the creek for 2 hours. One of those kind of great conversations in life. And then Sporadic Reader asks, do you get obsessed with the statistics for your videos? View counts, likes, comments, etc., or does that not affect you? It doesn't really affect me. Yeah, when I get the rare dislike on a video, part of me tries to kind of figure out what it was, but I don't get upset about it or anything. I find it funny more often than not. Yeah, I don't think too much about my statistics. Let's see, Joseph Francis Burton asked, what is your favorite local book written about, set in, or by a Wyoming author? And that would be The Meadow by James Galvin. We read this in our book club last year. I think it was late last year, yeah. And this is beautiful. It's kind of part fiction, part autobiography, part nature writing. And yeah, it's exquisite. I mean, just passage after passage that is not only beautifully written, but really captures life on the plains and what the weather is like, what the landscape is like, what it feels like. It does a kind of miraculous job of that. So, Mindy from Mindy's Book Journey asks, what is the best vacation you've ever taken? So part of me wants to say this cruise to the Caribbean that we took some years ago with my parents and my brother and his then wife and their kids, because it was really glorious. There was one morning in particular, but I tend to kind of compartmentalize that vacation as family time. And so as far as vacations go, it's just Kelly and myself. A few years back, we took a trip to Montreal to see the Rogers Cup, the tennis tournament, and that was wonderful, man. It was a week in Montreal, watching tennis live and in person. Sometimes on those small courts, like we saw a match between Jack Sock and Grigor Dimitrov, and I mean they were right fucking there. Like, I mean, 20 feet away from us. Those bleachers were uncomfortable as hell. I thought I was gonna have to be in traction afterward. But yeah, just a week in Montreal, kind of wandering around, drinking coffee, spending a hell of a lot of time in the bookstore, and watching tennis was kind of perfect. So, and then the last question for this video, Big Hard Books and Classics wants to know about my thoughts on the legalizing of cannabis. So it's slightly complicated. So the CBD oil that is used to treat some forms of epilepsy, etc., absolutely. But as far as the recreational use of the drug, smoking it, right, eating it in edibles, this, that, and the other thing, I used to be kind of hardline opposed to that. But anymore, I'm just like, well, I mean, that's kind of where it's going. I don't think that train really can be stopped. However, what I think needs to happen, and is not happening near as I can tell, there needs to be some way to measure the degree to which someone is intoxicated, for lack of a better word, with marijuana. Because it does impair a person's ability to make sound judgments, it impairs people's reflexes. People should not be driving when they've been smoking grass. It's legal in Colorado, a state just to the south of where I am. And I guarantee you that scads of people on the road, people who would never think of drinking and driving, are driving while high to some degree. That can't happen. What law enforcement is doing about that, figuring out how to judge that, gauge that, police that, I really don't know. But I've seen enough news stories to know that not enough is being done on that front, and that needs to change. So there we have it. Q&A video number 1. I will be back soon with Q&A video number 2. Adios.